Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam Otis. And man, we are going to lay it out and solve some problems. We're going to identify them, we're going to solve them, and we're going to get some solutions that you can put in your pocket. Maybe use them right now, maybe not even have to put them in your pocket. But I can tell you this, you're going to learn something today because I know I always do on every show. Cam, how about you?
Yes, sir. Learn something every show. We talk about little solutions put in your pocket, those kind of things. I got one because luckily it cleaned up enough. I don't have a bandage on my thumb anymore. Cut my hand on a broken coffee pot this morning. Rubber banded it back together for the top part. You got the little spring action. Got to keep the coffee flowing, right? Got a pot underneath it. Still making coffee in the house. So little solution. You just need a rubber band and take another pot underneath. You don't need that fancy glass pot that fits exactly in there. You can figure it out yourself. So there's one solution for you, Dad.
Damn, boy, if you only had some baling wire and duct tape, you'd be all over it too.
I think baling wire might be a little bit more sanitary than a rubber band, honestly. I bet on that one.
It doesn't melt with the heat from the coffee.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ooh, yeah, that might be a problem later on, but we'll see.
I don't know. Well, our guest, Luis is in a fancy city with fancy coffee. I imagine, Luis, have you ever had to do an emergency coffee pot repair in the morning?
I have not done an emergency coffee pot repair. I have multiple backups just in case, just because if the coffee runs dry, everything's not going to go right that day. So you got to be prepared for those days.
That's right. I mean, you got to throw it back to my old days of everything that we did in Special Forces was PACE, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. And there you go, man. If you got backup coffee pots around the house, there you go. Oh, yeah. I'm loving that. Man, so I always ask whenever we have a lawyer on the show, I always got to know what drove you into that profession. What was the thing that, I mean, do you just like to read or what?
It's funny because I didn't realize that being a lawyer meant that you read a lot until I got older. And so I don't have like this big story of, I was fighting for justice and I was an advocate or something happened in my family. It was basically my dad was like, one day you're going to be a lawyer or a comedian. Like that was it. And so I tell people now that I became a comedic lawyer because if you're around me, we're going to have a good time. We're going to have fun. We're going to tell jokes. My favorite show is The Office. And so, I feel like I'm a little bit like Michael Scott, in some regards, but that's basically it. I had a really good mentor of mine, a judge that I interned for, and he really taught me the profoundness of the profession. And so that coupled with my dad's words, and I became a lawyer. So that not a lot of fanfare to the story.
Talking about that profoundness, I'm interested because you said that reading caught you off guard a bit. I know I have a couple friends who had that same path of like a teacher or somebody like, gosh, you argue a lot, you make a great lawyer. They're like, okay, I'll be a lawyer. Then they learn what the hell that looks like and they turn around immediately. What was it that kept you around after you reached that point?
Well, I think that I kind of put off being a lawyer for a little bit. Like I graduated undergrad and I was very scared to go into a realm where I was going to have to read a lot, because when I say read a lot, I'm talking about 1,000 pages per class per semester. So if you're taking 5 classes, that's 5,000 pages of reading of complex legal information. We're not talking about, your favorite novel. We're not talking about Harry Potter. It's complex legal stuff. And so I wasn't really sure about that. But one day I just decided, I was driving down the road and I said, you know what? I can't keep waiting on my life. Like I'm not meant to do what I'm doing right now. And let me just give this lawyer thing, a shot. I went to the local Barnes and Nobles. I bought an LSAT, which is the law school admissions test study guide. I went and then studied for 2 weeks, took the next test that was available. I got high enough to get accepted into at least one school, and that was it. And I'm kind of a no quit personality as well. So I don't believe that when you start something, you should quit it. And so whether that was me playing baseball in college or starting law school, I already knew if I went into it, I was not going to quit.
Speaking of baseball, one of my favorites, even though we're not in season right now, so my baseball analogies don't come up quite as much. But what about playing the game
Mm-hmm.
because life does imitate baseball,
Yes.
imitates rugby too. But you know the true meaning of life imitates baseball.
Mm.
What is something that you carry over from the game that you still use in your practice in your business today?
I mean, I learned so many things from team sports, and I think that team sports teach you a level of selflessness. Hopefully, teaches you a level of selflessness, because in the game of baseball specifically, you really do rely on every position defensively to make sure that you get out of that inning. You rely more than just the pitcher, unless you have Ohtani up there pitching, and he can shut it down himself. But you usually rely on the entire team. So that was a big aspect of that. But what I learned more than anything was the mental preparation required on a day-to-day basis. And that's what I take to my daily life. I started the new year, and this is something that I had not done in many years, but I decided to come back to my roots of how I became successful. And it was that mental discipline. So every morning I get up and I read 10 pages. I write 1,000 words. I do my daily affirmations. I write down all of my goals. And it seems excessive for someone who, for most people, would think is successful. But to me, it's really important to maintain that mental discipline. And that's what I carried from baseball. And baseball, is a very superstitious sport. So you do everything exactly the same, right? Your batting gloves have to be the same. Your bat has to be the same amount of tar, the same amount of taping on the handle, the same amount of steps to walk to the batter's box. I mean, I could just go on and on. You hit your cleats 2 times, you put 1 foot in, then you look out, you do a big stretch, you put your bat up. And I mean, that's the whole thing. And that's all mental preparation. And so I took that into the business world. And what I learned is if you take into the business world that level of discipline in your mind game, you're unstoppable. And so to me, that's what I learned in baseball.
That's awesome. You reminded me of when I was coaching rugby, and I had one of my boys who was he was the scrum half, and he was also our kicker, and he was having trouble getting focused as different things were going on, and I had him do something as simple as just grab a fingers full of grass and just kind of do this like you're measuring the wind. So everybody out there thinks you're measuring the wind, right? But all you're doing is resetting yourself mentally.
Yeah.
And that mental aspect, there's so much that can be done with that. Heck, I was just writing my Monday Moments newsletter this morning, and I do that exact same thing. I don't grab the grass because I ain't got none. I'd have to grab the pine needles. But what I do is I turn on the playlist Peaceful Guitar.
Oh, nice.
And I listen to that, and that puts my mind is like, okay, time to write.
Yeah.
Time to write the newsletter. And I love that you're doing that and you're carrying that over. What do you do? Just curious. What do you do with the 1,000 words that you write each morning?
So I started about 18 months ago, so 19 months ago, and I've always wanted to be an author and a speaker. And I've written 2 books, and I do speak nationally, but I wanted to accelerate that. And I asked myself the question, how do I accelerate this writing career, this speaking career? And I just sat down and said, these are the books I want to write. These are the topics I want to write on. And I picked out 5 different topics that I wanted to write on. And I did an outline for each one of those topics. And then 18 months ago, I just started writing every single day. And so as of today, I have now completely written 5 books. Book number 1 is in editing, and I'll be releasing all 5 this year. So basically a 2-year journey from 0 to writing 5 books. And so really excited about that release.
That's awesome.
I'm actually really curious about that. And we're getting a little into the weeds on this. I'll pull this out after. Don't worry, folks. But on the writing side of things, talking about doing it every day, one of the things that I found to help myself with my writing is that it's not always following its exact pattern every single day, though. It's a form of writing. You talk about 5 books, probably bouncing around between those. How do you help to make sure those things are still flowing in a good way and not being all over the place as you're literally writing something different every single day?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really important to writing is being an avid reader. And when you're reading, you're getting more ideas, you're getting influenced by things that you're seeing in the books that you're reading, and your mind is becoming more developed and refined as to the ideas that you have. So one of the things that I like to do is I take one book and I'll write 1,000 words. And then day 2, I'll take another book and I'll write 1,000 words. But if I'm reading and I'm getting inspired by something, I may stay on one book for 5 or 6 days so that I can get the full inspiration out. And, there's a saying that there's nothing new under the sun. Like anything that's ever been developed has already been thought of prior to it being developed. And what we're doing as content creators, having a podcast, the Monday, mindset email that you write, it's
Monday
all
moments.
Monday moments.
Get the name
You
right.
got 2
Yes,
M's
the Monday
there.
moments. When you write the Monday moments, what you're doing is repackaging things that already exist in the universe, but you're packaging it in a way that makes sense to you and hopefully makes sense to your audience. And so when I'm writing, I'm not really creating anything new. I mean, it is new. It's, it's copyrighted at the end of it. It's my thoughts and my words, but they're inspirations of things that I've learned. And I'm repackaging it so that hopefully another person can use my inspiration to propel their career.
I love that approach. And what I'd be really curious about with that is how do you then, what's the filter on it? Because I think that's a great approach to creating it. But then there is almost this like dark path that I think we see some people on, they're pretty easy to spot, but it's like they're just spitting it back out and they're continually doing that. It's not necessarily from a cohesive direction. They're not really necessarily filtering that out. So what's your process of making sure that everything you're doing is, contributing to your purpose, pushing in that same direction?
Oh man, it's 2 things. It's creating a uniqueness around the concept. So there has to be a unique spin to what you are now rewriting. And number 2 is there has to be an experience. And so if you read my books, most of the books talk about stories. I tell stories about something that I was inspired on. So if I was inspired on, let's say one of my books is going to be on this idea of leadership, right? Leadership is such a big topic and there's so much been written about it. And so let's say I'm inspired by the concept of loving your team, which is one of my core leadership principles is you love your team. If I'm inspired about loving your team, then I'm going to spin a unique approach as to what it means to love your team as a leader. And so the concept of loving your team is not new, but the way that I deliver the concept of loving your team is my concept. And then I'm going to intertwine that with a story of how I loved my team, how I had a team member who had a family member going through a serious medical crisis and wanted to be able to work from home for 5 months. And I asked myself, what would a loving leader do in that scenario? And I let them work from home for 5 months. And it built unending loyalty for now this team member who's worked with me for 5 years. And so when you intertwine that story with the uniqueness of the concept that may not be new, it creates something new. It creates a new imagery for the person reading it.
Yeah, and that's that's so true. The story, I think, is the critical piece because we can all sit, go back to reading what the hell is it called, the court documents, whatever those things are called, the findings, and I think it's findings, right? Is that the right term?
Yeah, the findings of facts. Yeah.
Yeah, look at me. Look at Otis.
All your words.
There you go. You reading the findings, and there's very little story in those things, right? It's like, and it's so hard to digest. But if there's a story intertwined in those lessons, then what our mind does, because we are storytellers to our core, we're story listeners, story learners to our core, then we remember those lessons. And when you do that in your books, I'm just going to I'll put on my coach hat real quick, that not if, when we read the books, when we read the books. So I'm just throwing that out there. Sorry. I'm in one of those moves this morning, so y'all look out. You get it. You understand it because it's like, I can picture myself in that story. I can hear me, whether or not I experience that exact same thing, I can now have a vision of it. Whereas if you say leadership is telling people what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, and enrolling them in your vision.
Yeah.
God, really? Let me go read some more court findings because that's really about it.
Right.
So I love that you're doing that. That's great. I'm also while we're on this subject, how did you shift in the mindset from, because lawyering can be a very individual thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, it's very, you read your stuff, you write your things, you stand there and you present your things, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you shift from this lawyering to the business part of it, the business scene? Yeah, there we go. Man, I
Yeah,
told you I was on a roll today. Look out.
I was always an entrepreneur at heart. Like my passion has always been business, has always been entrepreneurship. I remember when I was young, living in Puerto Rico. My grandmother, we lived with our grandmother. We were on the first floor, and she was on the second floor of this 2-story house. And I remember she would ask me to go to the corner store and buy groceries, and she would give me $2, and there would be 25 cents change, and that would be my compensation for going to the grocery store. And that inspired me, like, wait a second, I can give a service and I can receive some sort of compensation for it. And so that led me into cutting grass when I became a teenager, and washing cars, and then eventually having multiple jobs in college that helped me learn about the business of entrepreneurship. And so I was always kind of geared towards entrepreneurship. I've started 10 businesses. I've owned a barber shop. I've owned multiple law firms. I've owned, a consulting business. And so that inspiration of entrepreneurship created a natural segue from being a lawyer to being an entrepreneurial type of lawyer. And so my love and passion has been in the legal industry, but more from the business side. And so now I get to help other businesses accomplish the same thing.
I guess I'm trying to think how to ask this, but talking about already being entrepreneurial, kind of having that approach, so that wouldn't have been an area that you had the shortcomings making that transition from, the law side into the business side of it, because it wasn't really a transition, like you said. What do you think were those gaps that you were missing then along the way? What was that first big pitfall as you started to make that transition?
I mean, I think for me and many entrepreneurs and even some of the clients that I work with is this concept of belief. I think that's the biggest pitfall that I've experienced and that I think other people experience, is believing that what has happened and to another business can happen for you. There's so many people who live a zero-sum game, and that is there's so much competition. They already have a big market share, so therefore I can't accomplish my goals and dreams. And believing that there's truly abundance in this world, that we can create more opportunity, that we can create a product or a service that could still service people, even if there's great competition, is really a powerful belief. And so I had to overcome that, because I had, imposter syndrome. We hear that term all the time. Like, I'm an imposter. I'm not an author, but I've written a book, but I'm not an author. I'm not a public speaker because I'm not Tony Robbins, but I speak around the country nationally. So it's like believing that you belong on the stage, believing that you belong on the shelves when you write your book, believing that you belong in the rooms and the circles of people who've already made it is a big shift. And so even though I was a lawyer, and even though I had the heart of an entrepreneur, I didn't have the belief that I could make it on my own, and I needed to get that. And so that was the hardest piece for me.
How'd you get it?
Hundreds and hundreds of books. I honestly attribute it to 3 parts of my life, and that's reading, listening, and praying. Just spending a lot of time reading things that are going to edify me. Reading biographies of people who have actually achieved things, and seeing the struggles they had, and realizing that the struggle is part of the game, and listening to inspirational messages where you can actually be uplifted on a daily basis, and listening to people talk about the stories that made them who they were, and then just praying. Some people don't pray, they meditate or whatever they do, but just believing that there was some higher power who was in control of this life, and that it was meant to be meaningful. Like that to me is the most powerful part of my life, is that I believe that I was born to be meaningful. And because of that, anything in my life that is not meaningful means that it shouldn't be there. And so I need to be meaningful. I need to be finding that meaning and that purpose through the way that I serve other people. So those were the 3 big things. And it took time. It took me probably 5-6 years to get to the point where I can say now that I belong, in that space. It reminds me of playing the piano. When I learned how to play the piano, the first 2 or 3 years, maybe even 4 years, people would ask me, "Do you know how to play the piano?" And I would say, "I'm learning to play the piano," for 4 years. And one day my wife said, "You're not learning to play the piano. You know how to play the piano." It's like at some point you have to believe that you belong. And sometimes it could take some years for sure.
I think an interesting thing with that is a quick tangent there, talking about learning to play the piano, calling yourself a piano player. I just thought about, people using the term athlete the other day. And now it's like, oh, they're not athletes. The NFL is athletes. No, those are superstar athletes. There's a reason we have those qualifiers to put in front of them. There's different levels to this stuff. We're allowed to be these things without being at the very top of it, right? We're in the same ball, same game. We're not playing in the same stadium. We might be down the road a bit, but there is comparison with that I think is an important piece. There's a reason that we have those qualifiers, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What I'm curious about, though, talking about belief, I always get to this interesting point where I think people can do this in an immoral way. You are definitely one of those people who's not open to that, but there is another path to this, which is the drinking the Kool-Aid of that belief, getting so behind an idea that you keep pushing it, not in an immoral way. I think there's a lot of people who get so self-righteous, talking about your reflection, those kind of things. You don't have that problem, but you might have the problem of getting so behind an idea that you don't want to let it go. And you just want to keep pushing this idea forward and forward and forward. And even though it might not be the right path forward, what is your process to keep that belief without, drinking the Kool-Aid, to put it that way?
I think, just to rephrase the conversation or the question that you're asking, it's when a person believes something that is no longer beneficial to them. Is that kind of what you're asking? Like, and they continue to drive themselves into, I guess, the ground with this belief.
Yeah. And I think specifically in the context of business, because a lot of the time it's like dedication to the idea of solving this problem, and it doesn't necessarily need to be solved, or you need to go look at the problem differently, things like that.
I think that, for me, having the belief in something ends at the moment that you don't have the passion for the thing that you're trying to do. And so for me, I have a passion for helping people grow their business. Like, that's my passion. And as long as I have that passion, I should continue to act and believe that my business can grow because I have that passion for that. But if for one day I lose the passion and all I'm doing is trying to make money, I think that at that point, it's not self-serving. It's actually doing a disservice to yourself, and it's doing a disservice to your clients. And so I think I had this question in a Q&A one time. I was on stage and they said, when do you give up? Right? Because I always talk about never giving up. When do you give up? And I think you give up when the obstacles are so great and your passion is so diminished that there's no path forward. I mean, if you have tremendous obstacles and you don't have the passion for it, you should just give up, because you don't even have the passion to persevere. And entrepreneurship is a game of perseverance. The last man standing will win this game. And so if you have great obstacles, but you have great passion, keep on going. But if you have great obstacles and you have no passion, it may be time to give up. So I think that's when you have to abandon that belief and move into something that you're more passionate about.
What's your advice then if you're in an area that you're passionate, but you're hitting that wall? Like, to put it bluntly, it is the wrong path, possibly. Sometimes things don't get created because it's not a good idea to create something, right? And you need to find that other outlet for your passion. What's your advice to people in that area, I guess?
It's always the question. I think I've seen this meme where it's like somebody's digging and digging and they're not reaching it, and then they abandon the dig, and the next person digs for like one day and they reach the gold, right? Yeah. When are you abandoning it too early, or when is it just a bad idea? That's the power of mentorship. That's the power of coaching. And I think that if you don't find a mentor and you don't find a coach, you're probably going to keep digging in the wrong place. You're probably never going to find the right solution. I attribute a lot of my success over the years to having the right mentors and the right coaches. And some of them had to be paid, because that's the funny thing about people. It's like everybody wants a mentor that's free. Like, where can I find me a free billionaire who wants to mentor me? Instead of going to the millionaire who's going to charge you and just paying to get to million. And so it's very strange how people operate. That I get asked all the time, hey, can you be my mentor? I cannot be your mentor because I am extremely busy and people pay me to be their mentor. So no, I cannot be your mentor. Now, if I knew you and it was organic and I just liked you and maybe we were a family friend and I mentored you, great. But I can't take everybody under my wing to mentor them for free. What you should do is invest in yourself and find somebody who can help you with that solution. So I think that is what you need to do. If you're hitting a ceiling and you don't know if it's the right path, and you don't know if you need to dig a little bit, longer and keep pushing and pushing, you should find a mentor or coach who can help you through that process.
I love that. And you reminded me of one of my favorite business lessons years ago. I called up a friend of mine as an organization, right? It's a membership organization. And I was an individual member, but there were also corporate members. And at the time, as an individual life member, the company I worked for was not a corporate member. Mm-hmm. So I called up my buddy because I knew he had a connection, because I needed a connection in a certain area, in a certain business and stuff like that. And I called him up and I said, hey, man, chit chat, catch up. I need a connection in this spot. Mm-hmm. He's like, I love you, brother, but I'm not going to give it to you because that's my IP.
Oh, wow.
And I said, it clicked in my head at that moment, because it made the metaphor I use is I own a 7-Eleven. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there in my 7-Eleven, and every afternoon, Louise on the way home from work walks in, goes to the cooler, grabs a 6-pack of beer, goes, thanks, Otis, see you later. And I just went, holy shit.
Yeah.
Holy shit. It occurred to me. I mean, we give away value, right?
Of course.
We do. We all do.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We give it away. But there's a difference between giving it away and somebody calling me up and saying, hey, Otis, would you mind coaching me for 6 months? Sure, man. Let me send you your invoice. Oh, you're going to charge me?
Right.
Right? I mean,
giving away the 6-pack of beer is a good idea at the 7-Eleven if he's going to sit around and eat chips and nachos and get a couple hot dogs afterwards. Yeah, then we're talking. You got to look at the whole big picture of it, right?
What's funny about the story is that if that person was your friend and they came to your house, you give them a 6-pack, willingly, because they're giving you value in the relationship, and so the context even matters. And that's the whole point. Like, a random customer down the street is not going to get the 6-pack for free because there's no relationship and there's no reason, there's no value in the relationship at the moment. But if that person was your friend, you'd give them the 6-pack at your house, right? And so, in fact, with my friends, I have a bar in my basement, and I have 2 taps, a Hopsecutioner, which is one of my favorite beers. I can't wait for people to come over so I can serve them a Hopsecutioner, right? I can't wait, because I want to share with people who add value to my life. And so I think that great story, because that's what people do. They want to steal from you. I hate that's a hard word. They want to steal from you, and then they get upset when you don't want to be stolen from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Talking about providing value, this is same area of the conversation, a little bit different. I'd be curious, Luis, we talk about providing value a lot, especially, whether it's coaching, giving away product, whatever it is. There's lots of different ways you can give away that value. I feel like you're always in an interesting area when we start talking with attorneys about this, because you giving away value, well, now that's legal advice. And now if I take that legal advice and I go do something, I'm not the lawyer here, but, obviously we know that rabbit hole, what that goes down. How do you still look to give that value and also, play the lawyer game, for lack of a better way to put it?
What's interesting is that the question is always asked, when has the attorney-client relationship been established? And the answer surprises people. It's established when the client believes that there's a relationship. So think about how strange that is. At the moment the client believes there's an attorney-client relationship, the relationship has been established. And so you have to be very careful when you give value, because you have to give the disclaimer. The value that I'm giving does not mean that we've established a lawyer-client relationship. I mean, we have to put those disclaimers on our website. We have to put them on our marketing and so forth. So the way that I look at it is the value that we give is more generalized value. It cannot be specific, because it requires findings of fact to give specific value. And so when people ask me for value, I had a question yesterday on social media about a child support thing. I don't even do family law, but they were asking me about child support, and I gave them generalized value. I said, "Hey, man, you probably need to talk to an attorney about this, but generally speaking, that child support question was answered in your final divorce decree and child custody agreement, and so you want to look there first." And then from there, you can make a decision as to what you want to do, but you should talk to a lawyer. So I can give generalized value, check here first, but I didn't give specific stuff. I didn't go tell him, go to the child support worksheet, do a new calculation. That'll tell you what you should be paying based upon your income, based on them. Then, send me the worksheet. I'll look at it for free, and then I'll send you back my thoughts. I didn't do all that. I just said it should be in this location. If you can't find it, go talk to a lawyer. So I think that's how we can add value without putting ourselves in a position where we now are bound to this client.
Yeah, I did that exact thing with my buddy Carrie. She was it's like, all right, Carrie. I mean, I literally said, all right, how are we going? At what point am I crossing the threshold to the attorney-client relationship on a business venture that I'm working on? And yep, she said, all right, I'll send you the thing, and then we're meshed that way, and it was really interesting because I've known her for, geez, I don't know how long, and we've talked about everything, and she'll always throw out that this is general, this is not. I'm not giving, because she's part of one of my masterminds too, so it's always kind of funny when she says stuff, but we all know that now. So that's one of those lawyer innuendos. They teach you that in the second year or third year of law school.
Yeah, second and third year.
To shift gears a little bit, I'm curious, talking about the business side of law firms. What do you think it is about that industry that, sets it apart from other industries or other areas that you've worked, as an entrepreneur in, and what kind of lessons do you think you could apply from that for other businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think the business of law is a very fertile ground for people to make great strides, because for many years, the legal industry has been held back by the rules governing marketing, right? There are states today that do not allow you to post on social media for your law firm without approval from the state bar. So just imagine you want to enter into, and I think it's the state of Alabama, you want to enter into a social media campaign, and you have to send every single one of your posts to the state bar for pre-approval. Like, that's a very archaic thing to have to do. In Florida, you can't use celebrity personalities to promote your law firm. Well, again, very archaic thing. You can't have an endorser. I can't have LeBron James, promoting my law firm. And so I think that a lot of rules are changing in the legal industry, but the legal industry is very archaic. It's prime for someone to come in once these rules start really loosening and make massive strides by transforming the legal industry into a traditional business industry. And I think that what we're doing with the consulting side and helping law firms is we're helping these law firms see the opportunities of transition. They get to see where they can actually become a real business. And that even sounds offensive to say, but many law firms are not real businesses. They're independent practitioners who happen to have an entity that is called a business, but they are really employees of their own firm. And so what we want people to see is that your business as a law firm can grow like any other business, like a medical facility. It can grow like a tax accounting firm. It can grow like the shoe store down the street if you prepare it properly. And so I think that that's the difference right now, is that the legal industry still in the old days, the ancient days of doing things, but it's ready. It's for the right group of people to come in and help people see it in a different way.
All right, I got to ask this though: if you want all these changes, what's the downside to those changes?
Well, the downside to the changes is that you, as you know, that most of the laws in the country are made by lawyers, right? The entire state government and the entire federal government is comprised of just hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of lawyers. And so the theory has always been, if you give too much power to lawyers, they will craft laws that benefit them to the exclusion of other people. We've seen this in the non-compete world, right? Most companies can get you to sign a non-compete. The legal industry forbids it by law, meaning I can compete. I can actually be an employee of a law firm, and I can leave the law firm and take all the cases I want to take from that law firm. You'd never be able to do that. Imagine you're a car salesman, you're working for Toyota, and you decide to quit and you say, I'm taking all these cars with me. I'm going to sell them down the street. Like, you'd never be allowed to do that. But in the legal industry, you're allowed to do that because of these restrictions on non-competes. So I think that's the downside. The downside is that there are people who will take advantage of that. But, there are people who take advantage of things in every industry. There are doctors. I saw a doctor here locally that served 10 years in prison for Medicare fraud. And he used the Medicare system, stole $80 million in fraudulent Medicare bills. What happens is that for whatever reason, there's become this stigma that only lawyers are dirty, that only lawyers do these negative things.
Come on, but ain't they? Ain't they? I mean, come on.
But that's the stigma that we get, and but it happens in every industry. And I think that even this concept of ambulance chaser, I've heard this many years. You got the ambulance chaser. The ambulance chaser, if you really break down what they do, is no different than any other industry when they're marketing. It's like it's just stigmatized in the legal industry, and so I think that that's the downside, is that as they're making laws, they may create environments where the laws benefit them to the detriment of society, and that could be problematic for sure.
I'm curious with that, because actually is kind of what the question I was thinking there. What do you think is the either like limiting factor of making it that business, or I don't know, what comes to mind to me, I guess, is almost like when you talk like nonprofits, and it's like, yes, a nonprofit should not be a business, but it also doesn't mean you guys don't need to ignore these hundreds of books about how to run an organization that are talking about business. Like, you can still learn all these things, you can still apply them, and you can still be a morally righteous nonprofit, and all of those kind of things that we like to put these things in. Yeah. Do you think there's like a room for a middle ground on that? Do you think that's what people are looking for? Or do you think, because you use the example of the ambulance chaser, it almost comes to mind of like the used car salesman, where because of the used car salesman, we just write off all car sales. And it becomes this just giant voodoo taboo thing where we don't want to even talk about that. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the question is so complex because there's like so many angles that we could go here, but I think that lawyers are necessary in our society. Somebody the other day posted something on social media that says, if you enjoy air travel, thank a lawyer, because it was the lawsuits that happened between the 1970s and 2000s that led to the advancement of our air industry to the point where we haven't had a commercial airline crash in 25 years or 23 years since the one that happened 3 months after 9/11. That there has not been anything in 23 years, and so thank a lawyer for that. The fact that medication and the pharmacy is held to task to what they create. Thank a lawyer for that. So like we need lawyers, and there needs to be more flexibility and freedom for them to operate their business like a business, so that they can live the life that they should live, and for the benefit that they're making in society and so forth. But I think that the future of the legal industry is highly dependent on ethical people doing the right thing and making the greatest impact that they can in our communities. If we find ethical people to be practitioners who can run their business like a business and make big impacts in our community, the world is a better place. And yes, used car salesmen, we're stigmatized and there was some truth probably to the ambulance chaser thing many years ago, but today that's very rarely the case. And so I think that the middle ground is making sure that we have a process for weeding out the weasels and keeping the great ethical people, and then giving them more flexibility to grow their business so that there can be a bigger impact. And I think that's the middle ground.
One more follow-up on this. I know we're deep down this rabbit hole, but I'm loving the response there. Do you think there's anything because once you start talking about that, you got to get to this point where it's like, well, we want good lawyers, good. You know, it's like for a lot of jobs that becomes the answer, where it's like, we do want the good people. Is there anything you think in the process of becoming a lawyer, law school, anything there that might provide a negative incentive, meaning that there is incentive, or not a negative incentive, but an incentive for the wrong type of person to come up? Like, to use the quick analogy of it, like in a lot of a lot of the business side of things, you're so incentivized towards risk that basically it's like if you just get lucky taking 5 risks in a row, you can rise up all the way to the top, and it's like you might not necessarily have the skills. The incentives don't necessarily line up right with the structure. Is there anything like that with law, or what are your thoughts as far as helping to make sure that problem doesn't become proliferate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that losing your license is the de-incentive. To
That's a
the
pretty
legal
good. That's a
industry.
pretty good check. That's to
But
be honest.
the bar to losing your license is so high that's like maybe lowering the bar to losing your license. Like I've seen lawyers who have committed fraud and embezzlement and have become alcoholics or drug addicts, and they keep their license. Like maybe reducing the bar so that when you don't have an alcoholic, drug addict, embezzling lawyer still representing people. Like that might be the bar that we need to have. And so it's really, really hard. So you can lose your license, but it's really, really hard to lose it. And I think it's important that maybe we reevaluate what the bar is for the loss of license or the suspension of license.
Let's talk about the.
You're right, Dad. We
There
sure
you
on
go.
you.
All right. Well, y'all froze up, so I was like,
Go ahead.
I'll wait. Let's talk about the conundrum of being a
You froze on us.
practicing lawyer.
I'll make a note.
Oh, okay. Well, let me start over.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. Let's talk about the conundrum of being a practicing lawyer. Getting that power surge of doing something, helping somebody, getting it right for that client, to running a business, because it's difficult to do both, because just like in the coaching industry, right?
Yeah.
If I'm out there doing coaching calls all day long, every day, I'm not running a business. I've got a job, right? Yeah. So talk to us about that conundrum, because I think, if I remember right, you went through that conundrum and that shift, even in your own growth as a lawyer and businessman.
I think that there's three types of legal entities that exist. There's the lawyer who happens to own a business, but they're really a solo practitioner and they love the law and all they do is the legal work. They just happen to own a business because they don't work for anyone. The second entity is a lawyer who sees themselves as a business owner, but they don't want a big business. They 10, 15 employees. I can have some cases, a little bit more volume. And then there's a lawyer who's like fully on the entrepreneurial side, who doesn't even want to be a lawyer. They just want to own a law firm. And so the journey that I went through, I went to law school and I always knew I wanted to own a law firm. But I did enjoy the high of representing somebody and getting that outcome. It's super sweet to get that outcome. But then I was like, I want a bigger law firm. And then as I continued to practice, I was like, wait a second, I don't want to be a lawyer at all. I just want to own a law firm. And so I think people fall into those three categories. They're either a lawyer, they're like a true lawyer and they happen to own a business, or they're a lawyer, but they have a little business sense and they like to have a little business, or they just don't want to be a lawyer at all and they're an entrepreneur. I fall into that last camp.
It seems like you wouldn't stumble over this too much, but I'd be curious, at least maybe some lessons you could perceive from this, of dropping that ego of, like Dad, I think in your example, you're talking like winning the big case, like we're all picturing all the court movies and speaking to the jury and all this. Like that's gotta be highest of highs. And then dropping down to being a servant leader 15 minutes afterwards, that could be a pretty big transition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously there's an ego play there, and you'll find that the most aggressive litigators, they thrive on that big ego of winning the case. But I think it just has to do with your disposition. Are you more of a lawyer? Are you a lawyer business owner, or are you an entrepreneur? And I think if you are an entrepreneur, letting go of that ego is really easy. As much as I loved winning the case, I would take owning at the law firm, being an entrepreneur, every single day and twice on Sunday over winning the case. So I think it's knowing yourself and then operating in that matter. And so the people who really, really struggle are the ones who believe they want to be entrepreneurs, but they have the heart of a litigator. Because that person is in camp 1 and camp 3. They want to be the lawyer, but they also want to be the entrepreneur. And man, that is tough. That is tough to do both those things.
How do you, since that's your business, just dropped something, 8-figure firm, how do you help them shift or come to terms with that, probably the balance of that?
So one of the, and this is really a marketing thing. We market to entrepreneurial lawyers. So I don't find a lot of people who still want to be the lawyer. And if they do want to be the lawyer, I convince them very quickly that they don't want to be the lawyer. So our ideal client is a lawyer, licensed practitioner who wants to be an entrepreneur. And so most of our messaging is to them. So we attract a lot of already entrepreneurial type of lawyers. And so they don't really have a problem giving up the legal work. I have a couple who have had an issue with it. They're still involved in the legal work. They're managing the best that they can, but it's very, very hard to get them out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I mean, even from what we do at Tribe and Purpose, to completely step away from it, man, that'd be tough.
Yeah,
because I mean, it's something I enjoy. Some people have told me I'm good at it. I don't know. One or two have told me that, which gets me thinking. English is not what I'm good at. I can tell you that. It got me thinking about what I learned today, and the novelty of it is the fact that the state attorney general, I think is what you said, or state bar in Alabama has to approve your social media post.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that is just to think about. Camden and I are sitting here, going back and forth on copywriting and pictures and stuff like that. And then I got to send it off to somebody else and wait for them to say, yeah, Otis, change this word because you might mislead a future client with that word. Right?
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So all my lawyer friends in Alabama, I feel for you. Feel for you, man. Go get your bar in Louisiana or maybe Georgia, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Honestly, my favorite one from today was an early one, which talking about baseball a little bit, Luis. You mentioned the baseball superstitions as a form of mental preparation, which I think is a really interesting thing because we tend to put them all the way into the bucket of that superstition. And that can be a kind of fun part of it. I'm sure there's people who truly believe, you got to wear the sock of my right foot out, inside out. Otherwise, I'm going to trip and fall when I'm, running the bases. Whatever it is, there's all sorts of those things I'm sure people actually believe. But when it comes down to it, those little pieces of preparation, getting that routine is really just mental preparation and a way of getting your brain ready, turning it on like, hey, I'm going to go do this job. I got to do this job. What is it in baseball? 168 times a year, whatever it is. You got to do that job all those times. You got to figure out a way to get a routine to jumpstart that every time. So I think that's a really interesting piece for it.
I mean, there's a lot more than 168 if you're a World Series champion like the Texas Rangers. Just saying.
What's the regular season? Please help me out. It's going to kill me. What's the regular season? Help me out.
That's 162, I thought.
162.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Oh, that makes sense. 81 double because every other sport, because hockey and basketball like to play 81. So there we go.
There you go. Luis, man, what'd you learn?
I learned that I'm still an athlete. Camden said that if you don't have to be in the pros to be an athlete, you can still be an athlete. So I'm leaving here. I'm telling my wife I'm an athlete, and it doesn't matter. I'm not in the pros, and so I need to start acting like an athlete. No, but I think it's very, very true that you don't have to be a $1 billion business to be a business owner. You don't have to be $100 million business to be a business owner. All you have to do is have a business and work at it. Have passion. If you're an athlete, you're an athlete. If you're a business owner, you're a business owner. Just do the best that you can, and I think everything works out.
Awesome. Luis, how do folks find you and learn more about 8-Figure Firm?
They can find me at luisscottjr.com. That's LuissCottjr.com. All my links are there. My books are there. Our conferences, the consulting business. They can subscribe to my podcast or to my email newsletter, and we can connect there.
What's the podcast? Give a shout out, please.
It's called The Guts and the Glory Show. So The Guts and Glory Show.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Luis, it has been great, man. I will not take any of this information as legal advice. So
I appreciate it.
Because I also don't want you to charge me for it. So
invoice pending. Don't worry, invoice pending. No, thank you guys for
Most
having me on.
expensive episode of the podcast,
It's been real fun. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Camden, let us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of the 10X Your Team with Cam Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Luis Scott, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along with other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again. We'll see you all next time.